All right, looks like we have quite a few people on, about 48. I'm sure more will be joining as we get going. And the first part of this is mostly administrative anyhow for the first 10 minutes. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first, Cassie has the slide up here. I'm welcoming everybody to our 12th webinar. It's June 1st, and couple things. One, ironically, it's also the first day of hurricane season, and Mother Nature has cooperated and spun up a little disturbance in the Gulf. So we'll be keeping an eye on that and starting the process of the hurricane gliders. But here today, really, it was built on from the workshop. There was quite a bit of interest, and organically, we built a breakout session on passive acoustics on gliders. So we have three great speakers who I'll introduce entirety right before their talks that you can see listed here, all the way from the vehicle side of the acoustics and ambient noise type things to actual monitoring of whales. And so great, and I appreciate these folks taking time out of their very, very busy schedules to be able to talk and talk to the larger community. And also always a shout out to Kathleen Bailey, Nick Rome, and Cassie for helping keeping all the mechanics of UG2 going. So totally appreciate that. Next slide. So here's just real quick agenda. I'll do some real quick updates, get through that, get into the really the meat of the webinar and the fun of it on the technical talks. And then I'll just do a quick wrap up. Next slide. So first, I just want to, before introducing, we just went through a period where we elected new steering committee members for UG2. But here is the list of the group that really was part of the officially establishing of UG2, our first steering committee. And a big shout out to the group here. You know, it was all being stood up right in the middle of the pandemic when folks were learning the new way of doing business. And we've set up focus areas and really got UG2 moving and ultimately helping with setting up the workshop. So I just, before showing the new members, I just wanted to, again, a big shout out to this group here and their efforts that in standing up the officially establishing UG2 in the steering committee. Thank you very much. Next slide. So this is our new, hopefully people can read this. It's after going through many nominees, this is our list of newly selected steering committee members, and definitely want to thank all the nominees. Everybody was super highly qualified and brought something unique. Our goal ultimately was to achieve geographic balance, diversity, inclusion, differing technical and scientific backgrounds, early through late career folks, sectors to include government, academia, nonprofit, industry, which we were able to accomplish. One thing to note here, as an outcome of the workshop, there was discussion on how to engage industry. So we have stood up an industry panel of vehicle folks and sensor folks. And that panel has nominated a representative that will actually attend the steering committees for the first round of this is Catherine Zaba, or Kaja, as some people may know her. So that's a new addition to the steering committee to have this. And the other on the executive sponsor side is Bob Houtman, retired, and Lisa Cloud has voluntarily filled that spot on the executive committee. The folks that are in italics, if you can see that, they're the new folks, and the folks that are not or repeat, that people that were on the earlier steering committee as well. So you can see we have quite a few new folks and look forward to working with them in the future. Next slide. So just a couple of things that were, the steering committee, we had our kickoff meeting on May 12th, and just really was a lot of just introductions, but we'll be looking at continuing working groups from the workshop, and that will be hopefully engaging and reaching out to the UG2 community as a whole, but possibly using Slack for these rather than have assigned periods of time, using Slack and setting up channels that are specific to the working groups and have dialogue with a lead person, but using Slack as the tool to communicate. Because trying to get people together on every so often at a certain time is just very difficult. So, and Slack has been a really go-to tool. And we like feedback on that from the UG2 in general, if that's a good way to go. And then moving forward, what should be the content on the website versus what we do in Slack? Setting up the 2024 workshop, believe it or not, that's, you have to do that well in advance and start picking the location and the dates. And so we can start pressing forward with doing that as a steering committee and engaging with the UG2 community as a whole on getting some feedback on how to set that up. And then one topic is also setting up a focus group for students to get students more engaged and establish career paths, hopefully, or get people excited about career paths with gliders. And then also Hank Stachwich has been working on training opportunities and gaps and setting up a tiered approach to that. And just FYI, also, we submitted an abstract for Oceans 2023 on the Gulf Coast in Biloxi, Mississippi, the 22nd through the 25th. So hopefully people can plan on attending that, and also for the Ocean Science meeting to be held in New Orleans, 18 to 23 February. So just mark those on your calendar, as we did submit abstracts. Nothing has been approved yet, but fingers crossed, and those are our plans moving forward for right now. Any questions real quick on anything I just kind of flew through? Just give it a few seconds if anybody has anything. Cool. I don't see anything, so we'll move on to the next slide. And we'll get into the real fun of the meeting today, and let's get into the technical talks. And so first off, we have Dr. Lauren Van Oefelen, and she'll be talking on passive acoustics receiving on gliders, advantages and challenges. So Laura is an assistant professor in ocean engineering at the University of Rhode Island. She's the 2023 recipient of the URL Early Career Faculty Research and Scholarship Excellence Award in Life Sciences, Physical Sciences, and Engineering. She has a PhD in oceanography from Scripps Institute of Oceanography and is interested in acoustic propagation and acoustic receiving on mobile platforms. In addition to mentoring graduate students, she teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in ocean engineering and underwater acoustics. And Laura, very much look forward to your talk, and I'll let you take over.
All right, thanks so much. Let me see if I can share. Hold on a second. Give me a second. I'm a Zoom person, so.
No worries. I'll let you know when we see it.
All right. Let me see if I can do it this way. This is not working like it did yesterday. Can you see it?
Not yet.
No?
No.
Laura, I have them up and ready if you just want me to share them.
How's that?
Yes, it's coming up.
There it is.
And it is up. Yep.
Okay. Oh, but you also see this, don't you?
Yeah, I got to get rid of that.
Let me move that somewhere else. How's that?
Looks good. Everybody, thumbs up. Everybody sees it?
Thumbs
Yep.
up?
Good.
Okay.
Deal.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for having me today. I'm going to be talking about acoustic receiving on glider type autonomous underwater vehicles, advantages and challenges. So this is going to be more of a general overview type of talk. I come from an underwater acoustics background, so I'm really interested in sound propagation underwater, and I'm really interested in how we can use mobile platforms, including gliders, for acoustic receiving. So my lab at URI is called the Opera Lab. We do not sing, but this stands for Ocean Platforms, Experiments, and Research in Acoustics. So I wanted to start out by talking about why are we having this webinar on underwater sound on vehicles? Well, underwater sound is an essential ocean variable. It's been declared this by the Global Ocean Observing System, and I always introduce this when I start teaching my undergraduate course. I teach an undergraduate class in underwater acoustics that's required of all our ocean engineering majors. And a lot of them don't know when they sit down for the first day of class why they are there, because they are required to take this course. And so what I tell them is that sound underwater, well, it's like seeing in air, right? So we use sound underwater, and animals use sound underwater, like we would rely on light and on the visual spectrum in our world here, our terrestrial world. And so we use light for sensing our environment. We use electromagnetic waves for communication. So all our cell phones run on the EM spectrum. And we also use it for localization. So GPS are also electromagnetic waves. But these waves that we rely on in our everyday lives up here do not transmit very far underwater. Underwater sound, on the other hand, travels very far underwater. It can travel under the right conditions across ocean basins. And so I've included a couple figures here. Are you able to see my my pointer?
Yeah, your cursor. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So I like this figure of a deep water sound speed profile. And so this demonstrates, that there is a duct, there's a sound speed minimum in a deep water ocean profile that allows sound to refract or bend towards this area of the lowest sound speed. And this makes it so it does not interact with the surface, or more importantly, the bottom. And so this sound can travel very long distances underwater. Now, this is more true for lower frequencies than high frequencies, but this really just demonstrates why underwater sound is important and why we're talking about this today. This figure over here I took from a NOAA website because I thought it demonstrated really well what an underwater soundscape is, right? So there are a lot of sounds underwater. Like I said, humans use sound underwater. Marine animals use sound underwater, and sounds are also produced by other things underwater, like earthquakes, right? That are not sent on purpose, but they are there. And so this is all part of the underwater soundscape. So these are all things that are important to measure when we're trying to understand underwater sound. I also wanted to point out this really great resource. This is the Discovery of Sound in the Sea website. So I'm not sure what the audience's experience is with acoustics, but if this is something brand new to you, I recommend that docits.org is one of the first stops you make if you're interested in learning more. It's a really great website that has information on the science of sound, how sound is produced, how we measure sound, including decibels, which is it's a difficult unit. I spend a lot of time in my undergraduate course on that unit. But there's also these amazing galleries. So if you play around in this website, I recommend you go to the gallery section, which has, for one thing, it has a sound gallery. And so it shows you different sounds from all different marine animals and also other sources. So you can play them and you can look at spectrograms. There's also a gallery on technology, and underwater gliders is included. So there's a page on underwater gliders on this website for technology that's used in underwater acoustics. So for gliders, some of the applications that we're interested in are, first of all, soundscape analysis, right? So that picture I showed earlier that had all the different sources of sound. Soundscape analysis is really just looking at the acoustic landscape. So essentially looking at the sounds that make up the ambient sound, and looking at the sources for those, how loud different components of that soundscape are, for example. It's also used for bioacoustic signal detection, and I think our next two talks today are really going to focus on that. I'm going to introduce a spectrogram right now for those of you who are not familiar, and I'm sure you'll see more of these in my talk, and you probably will in the following two talks as well. But this is essentially a way to look at the frequency spectrum of sound as it changes with time. So frequency is here on the y-axis and time is here on the x-axis. So these are some spectrograms from a 2017 JOE paper. This was from a sea glider mission that we did offshore from the Big Island of Hawaii. And so on the top plot, you see blackfish. So that's what these signals are, kind of between 2 and 7 kilohertz. And there are also humpback whale calls that are down here, these yellow lines that are below 1 kilohertz. The bottom panel also shows some dolphin whistles. So that's really all. I'm going to talk about bioacoustics, and I'm going to leave that to the following speakers. I really use gliders quite often to record acoustic transmissions from sources. So this is passive in the sense that we are not actively transmitting from the glider itself. We are only receiving signals, but we are receiving signals that have been sent. And so we can use this for a number of things, including localization and studying acoustic propagation, which is what I'm primarily interested in. I also wanted to note that most gliders are already equipped in some way for active acoustics because they are equipped with an altimeter, which is an active acoustic instrument because it is sending out sound and then waiting for a reception of that sound. This is a picture of one of the gliders in my lab. So we're using a sea glider, and I'm going to be talking primarily about the sea glider vehicle today. So you can see here is the CT scale. This one got scraped up on a boat a little bit. But this is where we put the hydrophone. So this is our acoustic sensor. And they can be placed in different locations. So the plots I showed earlier were from a deployment in Hawaii where we also had hydrophones on the wings. And I know other folks have also put passive acoustic receivers on the antenna here. But this particular one has the package on this panel behind the CT sail. This one is a recorder from JASCO Applied Sciences. So it's their PAM MK2 model. So this is a hydrophone that was adapted from a moored observing package that is often used to record data in one place. So they adapted that technology and those electronics to put on the glider, and they incorporate it with the glider so that we can change parameters in the command file to change when we're recording, for example, and it also can turn on and off this recorder. So this was based on their observer sensing package. They also have an AMR options, which is based on a lower power recording package, but that one has less processing capability. So there's a couple different ones out there, and there are many other acoustic recording packages that are out there as well, including the DMON and the Whisper and many others. So some of the reasons we like to use gliders for acoustics are, first of all, they're mobile. I just talked about these sensing packages that are in one place, which are great if you're only interested in looking at the soundscape in one location. So gliders offer this opportunity to move through the water and to make measurements of the soundscape at different locations. They're also long duration, particularly when you compare them to other types of propelled AUVs, as you all know. Quite often, acoustic measurements are also made from ships, and when compared with a ship, glider is a relatively inexpensive platform if you're making mobile measurements of acoustics. Another bonus that gliders have is that they're always taking measurements of conductivity, temperature, and pressure. So that CTD data is really what we need to characterize the sound propagation environment. So I do a lot of acoustic propagation modeling, and so having measurements of the conductivity, temperature, and pressure as you're moving with range is really valuable to help us make acoustic predictions. But primarily, the reason we like to use gliders for acoustics measurements is that they're quiet. They're very quiet compared to other types of autonomous underwater vehicles. But they do make some noise. And so I'm taking some figures from a master's thesis from a graduate student of mine who was looking at not the passive acoustic data on the soundscape that we were recording, although that is interesting also. She was actually looking at the self noise from the vehicle itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the noise that we measured on the platform using that PAM MK2 system. So here's another spectrogram. This one, the frequency on the left axis, it goes up to 64 kilohertz. That's the Nyquist frequency. So we were recording 128 kilosamples per second, which is a pretty high sample rate here. And what you're looking at here as we move out through about 30 seconds of time is a pitch event. So this is near the surface. So here's a pitch event, and that's followed by a bleed here, and that's followed by a roll. So we found when looking through a lot of these data that each of those functions of the vehicle itself could be identified with a specific acoustic signature. We also found when we were looking through this data that there was kind of a constant line running through all of our spectrograms. This is around 32 kilohertz. And so we found that the Sea Glider's Tattletale 8 CPU includes a Motorola microprocessor that has a clock that operates at about 32 kilohertz. And so we're assuming that this, what's indicated as a continuous signal, is that signal as well. Also, let me note that this is above the range of human hearing. So humans hear between about 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz. And so we're really looking at just this lower band of the spectrogram that falls within the range of human hearing. And honestly, that's for a young child. I think some of, if you're getting older, your hearing is probably decreasing to maybe 15 kilohertz or below, or my husband was a helicopter pilot, so his is, we've measured at 12 kilohertz. And so we're really only hearing this part of the spectrogram. So this shows up in the acoustic data, but it's not discernible by the human ear. So another interesting thing we saw when going through this is we saw this constant tonal ping coming through. And we also found when looking at a bunch of data that the rate of this changed when we changed our sampling for our Seabird Electronics conductivity and temperature sensor. And so we were able to align these pings with the samples from the CT sail, which was kind of interesting. It actually helped us out because during one deployment, we had a clock that wasn't set properly. And so we were able to look at when the sampling regime changed, and we're able to line it up with these samples. So it actually helped us get our clock straightened out. So I showed here the pitch, bleed, and roll, but by far the loudest noise that the vehicle produces is the pump. So this is a spectrogram of the buoyancy control pump. This is just a boost pump that's starting here, and then it's joined by the main pump. So this box plot here illustrates the distribution of the RMS sound pressure levels of the different guidance and control functions from the glider. This sound pressure level here is on the y-axis, and you can see that the boost and main pump together come almost up to 145 decibels. Which is comparable to what we see for regular propelled autonomous underwater vehicles, right? So they operate kind of in this range here. The roll and the pitch are much quieter, as are bleeds. But we also know that although these pumping events are loud, they don't occur throughout the dive cycle. So most of the pumping and pitch events also happen near the surface and near the apogee of the dive. So here is one dive profile down to 1,000 meters. This was taken from a mission that we did in the Gulf of Mexico. And this shows kind of where all of the different events were happening during the dive. And this can be taken straight from the netcdf file that the glider returns. And so we see that, there's bleeding events here and pumping events here and here. And then you see a few pitching events also. But most of the dive cycle only has roll events. These happen throughout, but these are much shorter and much quieter. So this box plot here shows the durations of the different events. So you can see the rolls are very, very short, second or two. Pitch is also short. The bleeds can be longer, and the pumps average about 45 seconds here. This was for this mission that we looked at, but they can be longer and can go up to a couple of minutes. But still, this shows that during most of the dive, the gliders are very quiet instruments. And also, these events were all lined up between the acoustic data that were collected and the information that were provided in the log or netcdf files. And so if you desire to filter that out, it can be done pretty straightforwardly. So that's the primary advantage of the glider, is that they're a quiet vehicle. There are also some challenges with using gliders for acoustics. There are power limitations, payload limitations, and data reporting limitations. The power limitations are probably the most significant for acoustic instruments, and they do shorten the life of a glider mission when you put an acoustic sensor on there, obviously. It's also, you notice that the data that I was showing before, we were sampling up to 128 kilosamples per second, and that data adds up really quickly. These were recorded into 30-minute files, and each of those is 692 megabytes. So that's really over a gigabyte per hour. So you can see how that would add up during a glider mission pretty quickly. So this data can't all be reported via Iridium each time the glider surfaces. So either you have to recover it all when you recover the glider, or else you have to condense the data and report back relevant data, which I think Clark is going to talk about in his talk next. Celine might as well. So I'm hoping to learn more about how that is being implemented. Of course, also, if you're in the Arctic, there's also the problem of returning data if there's ice. One thing that I've become very interested in is subsea positioning of the glider. So the glider gets GPS at the surface, at each surfacing, but while it's underwater, we don't get ground truth positions. So this is complicated for the sea glider vehicle, because for underwater acoustics, timing is really, really important. And particularly if we want to use acoustic signals that were transmitted, we need to have very accurate timing, and we need to know precisely where the vehicle is while it's underwater. The glider is a particularly difficult instrument in this regard because of the power limitations. We can't, most INSs that are worth their salt will not work well on the glider. We can't power them. Usually an INS unit requires a lot of power and or space, which is not an option on this vehicle. It's also complicated by the fact that gliders operate in mid-water, so we can't put a Doppler velocity log on the glider, which is used in most AUVs to aid in navigation. Mm-hmm. So we took a sea glider to a U.S. Navy acoustic tracking facility located in Dayba Bay in Washington. So this is a picture of former graduate student of mine, Wendy Snyder. So we took the glider up there and tracked it for a few days on the range. And so essentially what we did was we put a pinger on the glider, and the glider will ping to an array of hydrophones that's mounted on the seafloor, and so they can track it. So they can track torpedoes and all sorts of things at this facility. But what we're really looking for is a ground truth of where the glider is versus where the glider thinks it is. And so we also put on a MEMS, inertial navigation unit. and those of you who know anything about these MIMS, IMUs, know that they drift very quickly. And that is what we saw. It drifted within the first 5 minutes of the dive. But she did find that she was able to use this data in conjunction with one of the glider models, the glide slope model. She was able to use the attitude measurements made by the inertial measurement unit to get results that were comparable with the vehicle flight models, but they did not outperform the hydrodynamic model. And so we also shared the data that we collected here with Jim Bennett and Charlie Erickson at the University of Washington. So they have worked very hard on refining the hydrodynamic models for the glider. And this is really still the best way that we have to estimate glider position while underwater. So we got together with them, wrote this paper in JTech, if you want to check it out, for 2021. And they were really looking at comparing the ground truth positions that we measured on the range to the predicted positions with the hydrodynamic model. And so this is one of the dives that we did. We could only go down to about, this one only goes down to about 95 meters. The range is only about 200 meters. So we did have some dives that were deeper than this, but we couldn't go all the way to 1,000 meters. Here we're looking at the range track, which is shown in red, versus the hydrodynamic model that's corrected with the DAC, the dive average current, as you come through. And it did a pretty good job. But one thing they were really interested in looking at is when it starts to deviate, you can see that most of that error growth happens during this apogee phase of the dive. So before I finish up here, I also wanted to briefly talk about the reason why I am interested in gliders for underwater acoustics. And that's because I'm really interested in this idea of tomography, which is using travel times, acoustic travel times, to invert for ocean temperature. So the idea is if you know how long it takes sound to travel from one point to another, then you can, and because the sound speed depends on temperature, then you can invert for that temperature. So this is an experiment that was done up in the Arctic. So this is up here, so it's north of Alaska. And Scripps Institution of Oceanography, colleagues there, deployed moorings at each of these pin locations that had acoustic sources that were suspended in a sound speed minimum. So similar to the sound speed minimum I showed on my first slide here, but it's a smaller duct that is characteristic of this region of the Arctic, and which is new within the past few decades due to changes in the climate in the Arctic Ocean. And so this is really changing the way that sound propagates, and we're interested in learning about this propagation and therefore the sound speed structure that's causing it. So colleagues at the University of Washington, Sarah Webster et al., helped us deploy some gliders up in the Arctic, and we received acoustic transmissions from all of these sources. And so the idea is that if we have these sources, we have, a fixed number of acoustic paths, but if we have these gliders going through, as you see here, these are the paths of the gliders. If we have these gliders going through, then we multiply the number of acoustic paths that we have. And so this helps us look at the propagation for one thing, because it shows us what the acoustic propagation looks like at many different ranges relative to the source, which has been a really interesting data set. And we're also interested in looking how we can use the acoustic signals to localize the gliders while they're underwater. This is, so a graduate student of mine, Luis Pomales, is particularly interested in this localization problem. And he's specifically looking at the impact of Doppler. So the fact that this glider is in motion, that the glider is moving as it's receiving the signals, he's looking at the impact that has on the range measurements, and found that it has significant impact. So it impacts, he looked at 1,241 receptions and found that I think it was 91% of them were affected in the range, right? The ranging provided by these signals was affected by more than 10 meters by Doppler effects alone. And so that went up to about 200 meters. He also found that this affected ranging at short ranges more so because it makes up a larger portion of the range. I'm not going to go into this too much, but Luis is going to the IEEE Oceans Conference in just a couple weeks in Limerick, Ireland. So if you are also going to Limerick, please go see his talk. I think it's going to be on Tuesday in the acoustical oceanography section. So I think my time is about up, but in summary, some of the acoustic advantages for gliders are that they are relatively quiet, right? They do make some noise. We know that that noise happens mostly at the surface and near apogee. They are great for acoustic receiving because they are persistent. They can be out for a long time. There are some challenges associated with using gliders, and those include subsea positioning, which I mentioned briefly, and also the payload data power limitations, which I'm hoping will also be addressed in the next couple of lectures. I want to acknowledge my graduate students. A lot of the work I presented here was theirs. So Luis Pomales, Wendy Snyder, who's now at Newark and Keyport, Melody Ross, who's now at Newark and Newport, Christian Graupe, who's now at JASCO, and then also acknowledge sponsors of work, which include the Office of Naval Research and the National Institute for Undersea Vehicle Technology. And if I take any questions, I'll also put up this list of sources if you're interested in reading more.
Probably have a minute or two for questions. There was one question from Joshua Scholl, but I think Josh got an answer from Clark. And if I'm not correct, Josh, please speak up. Are there any other, we could probably take a question or maybe two real quick.
Hi, Laura, this is Dave Mellinger.
Hi.
I'm thinking about your recording system. Do you know,
Yeah.
and I think about this a lot in terms of glider longevity. How long can you put them out for? And I'm wondering if you know how much power it uses. And were you using the glider batteries to power it, or do you have external batteries in their own pressure case or something?
Yeah, it had batteries in its own pressure case for most of the missions that we had, but it's also possible to power it from the glider itself.
Okay. Do you know what its power draw is?
That is, I don't know right off, but I could look and get back to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm trying to find the best solution for that.
Yeah. Yeah, we've also looked at adding additional sensors. That is one issue we've looked at. We've put pingers on the glider also, and we've looked at putting specialized ADCP on there, as well as other instrumentation. And that's always the question, right? Are you going to power it on its own or power it from the glider? You power it on its own, you're adding weight, right?
Yes.
Power it from the glider, and you're taking
payload
away.
mass. I mean, payload volume too is an issue.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to weigh.
Yep.
Thanks. If you can maybe do a quick 30-second answer here, because we're kind of running a little over, but Doug Grimes asked, are the impacts on range from Doppler based on range or change in the signal based on propagation impacts due to depths? I don't know if you can see it in the chat or not, but
so I don't know if this will answer, but it makes a difference what kind of signal you're using. So I didn't go into it deeply, but the equation that I showed on that last slide essentially takes into account the frequency and bandwidth of the source, and that is specifically for a LFM sweep, so a low frequency or linear frequency modulated sweep, and so that equation will change depending on which signal you are using. So it is a little specialized, but the impacts from Doppler are mostly dependent on the signal and then the speed of the vehicle in the direction of the source, right? So we have to look at the component of the velocity that's heading directly towards the source.
okay. And I think there was a couple of comments, but we need to move on. Mark Baumgartner, if you look in the chat, there's some follow-on to that as well. And Laura, thanks a ton. That was super. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
And we'll move on to our next talk. And this is Dr. Clark Richards. He'll be talking on glider-based real-time monitoring for North Atlantic right whales. Clark is an observational physical oceanographer who uses traditional approaches, i.e. ships moorings, as well as autonomous systems, floats, gliders, observatories for monitoring the oceans. He obtained his PhD from Dalhousie University in 2012, studying the mixing caused by breaking internal waves in the St. Lawrence estuary, and did a postdoc at Huey from 2012 to 2015. He spent a year with RBR in Ottawa, focused on CTD design improvements and the integration of these onto autonomous platforms. Since 2016, he's been a research scientist with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography in Halifax, where his two main programs are monitoring in the Canadian Arctic, including acoustic monitoring and a glider monitoring program. Since 2021, Clark has been working with the Whale Acoustic SLOCUM program, acronym WASP, which is a new program run by DFO to monitor coastal waters with gliders for the presence of endangered North Atlantic right whale. So Clark, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you. We'll see if your presentation is coming up. I think.
All right, you can hear me okay?
I can hear you. I don't see your presentation.
Presentation's coming here.
Okay. Yep.
Is that up now?
No.
Not yet. We see you.
See me, okay. I'm gonna try this again. It worked yesterday, Cassie.
It did.
I'm gonna share entire screen.
I think it's coming up.
Okay.
Now, what
You can
happens
all,
is, now we just wind up with a picture of you each time.
is that, have you got the presentation now?
No, not yet.
Okay. Why? Cassie, it worked. I swear to God, we had this figured out. I emailed you the presentation, Cassie. If you have it there, maybe you can just toss it up.
Let me check my email. I didn't
Okay,
see
sorry.
it.
I did it only just not that long ago.
All good. You can pull it up.
I'll just say maybe while Cassie's pulling that up, thanks to Laura for that opening talk. You can't really do much better for an opening talk about acoustics on gliders than something as sort of fundamental as that. So I in putting this together, I thought it's hard to cater to everybody. So I decided to not get too much into the details, and I'm really glad I didn't, because I would have done about 100th as good a job as Laura did presenting all of that. So, okay, I am seeing my slides now. I assume everybody else is as well, so we should be good to go. Okay, so thanks for the intro, Bill. I guess I wrote that, so I thank myself. But I wanted to point out from that my expertise is really in physical oceanography, and I've been working with gliders for a number of years now, which is the reason that I've gotten involved in the program that I'm going to talk about today. But I'm not going to get too deep into science and research on this for two reasons. One is I am neither an acoustical oceanographer, although I do a lot of acoustics on the side, nor a marine mammal biologist. So, my interest in this program in particular, and my involvement is really a bit more focused on the glider aspects of that. So, there's some questions that I may be able to answer, and hopefully I can hit a few points that Laura pointed out, and maybe we can have a bit of discussion about some of the specifics of the program. But the other aspect of this is that it, as compared to a lot of other sort of acoustic monitoring programs, and as you'll see as I get into the program I'm going to talk about today specifically is really focused on operational purposes. So we don't want to know what right whales sound like when they're feeding or whatever. There's lots of people looking into these different aspects of North Atlantic right whale ecology and feeding and habitats and behaviors. I would say, you know, obviously we're interested in that kind of stuff, but really our interest is there a whale where we're listening? You know, have we found a whale in a certain area? And I'll get into why that's important. So yeah, the acronym for this program, we went with WASP, a Whale Acoustic Slocum program. And really the focus here is on specifically the near real-time acoustic monitoring for North Atlantic right whales in the Canadian Maritimes region. And there's a lot of people involved in this project. As I said, I'm not acoustics or a whale person. So Pam and Angela and Hillary are my sort of co-scientists on this, who've really been involved in a lot of the other aspects that I'm not an expert in here. Next slide, please. So this is maybe not news to most of you, but you know, the North Atlantic right whales, the population is in really bad shape. I took this screenshot from the Government of Canada's website about this issue. I'm not sure exactly where this number comes from. I did notice Mark Baumgartner's on the call. He probably has a better sense of what these numbers actually are, but you know, there are only 300 or so North Atlantic right whales left in the world. And that's pretty bad. And you know, the goal really is to try and keep it from being zero in the next few years, because as you'll see in some of what I'm going to show, the population has been declining very rapidly. Of course, the population is really low to begin with, because for many hundreds of years humans hunted them extensively. They're sort of called the right whale, as I understand, largely because they were the right whale to try and hunt. You know, they have a lot of oil content. They're very slow, which makes them easy to catch, which is good if you are hunting them. Unfortunately, even if you're not hunting them, slow whales that congregate around places where people like to be, it's also bad for the population, because they don't do a good job of surviving in areas that humans also occupy. Next slide. I don't know if you can go back one. Okay, so this is just a bit of a view at what right whale mortality has looked like over the last few decades. You can see that in the last couple of decades, it has gone up quite drastically. In particular, draw your attention to the spike of mortality in 2017. This was, you know, a really bad year for right whales, particularly in Canada. Many of the whales that were found killed during that season were in Canadian waters, many of them in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which, again, I'm not a whale person. I won't get into the details, but the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which you'll see in some maps shortly, it was kind of a new habitat for North Atlantic right whales. Typically, they have traditionally, in the summer and fall seasons, gone to the Bay of Fundy and on the Scotian Shelf, where there are good feeding grounds, but they sort of showed up unexpectedly in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in 2017. And unfortunately, the Gulf of St. Lawrence is also a very an area with very heavy fishing activity and a lot of large tanker, you know, shipping transport ships as well. But anyway, the summary there is, since 2017, there have been 35 confirmed right whale, or 34 confirmed right whale deaths. 21 of those have been in Canadian waters. Okay, next slide. So the government, you know, clearly has a mandate to try and help, you know, keep these whales from going to extinction. And so there's been a number of strategies adopted since 2017. The first one, is kind of the obvious one, is and it has been used in the past, in particular in the Bay of Fundy, is to try and get ship traffic to either avoid areas where whales are or where they may be, or to actually slow down. You know, if they can't avoid it, right? Remember, I said the Gulf of St. Lawrence is a major shipping route. You know, this is where all of the Great Lakes shipping traffic has to go to get out to the North Atlantic or coming in. And so the goal here is to get the ships to slow down. First of all, because, well, it gives more time for the whales to get out of the way, but also there is some research suggesting that there's a bit of a critical speed, that if whales are struck above a certain speed, which is, well, 10 knots is actually still quite fast if you're going to run into a whale with a pretty large boat. But certainly if you're going less than 10 knots, you'll cause less damage. So there were some mandatory as well as voluntary slowdowns and some areas of specific avoidance where they'd asked and then sometimes required ships to actually avoid those areas. Just advance the slide one, please. Another strategy to try and mitigate right whale deaths, because one of the major causes of harm to right whales is that they get entangled in fishing gear. So, you know, my employer, Fisheries and Oceans, is also in charge of the fishing seasons and all the regulations around that. So they introduced some dynamic fishing closures. So if whales were detected or spotted in certain fishing areas, usually these are snow crab fisheries, which have pots on the bottom and then also lots of series of recovery lines throughout the water column that the whales can become entangled in. And if a whale becomes entangled in a line, you know, it doesn't always kill it right away, but it certainly doesn't give it a good outlook on life if they become entangled enough that, you know, the lines get into their baleen or get wrapped around their fins because it impedes their feeding. They become very unhealthy, and, you know, they may not specifically die as a result of an entanglement, but an entanglement may be, you know, the factor that leads to various causes that can cause them to suffer greatly and eventually die. And advance another one, please. And I'm not going to talk about any of this, but you know, there's a lot of work right now on other ways to try and you know, keep whales from being impacted, but not impact things like the fishing industry. And there's a lot of research right now that I believe Mark Baumgartner is quite involved in, looking at things like ropeless fishing gear. So essentially using the kind of things that us oceanographers have been doing for years, acoustic releases and other things to try and keep those lines out of the water column. There's some experiments with weaker lines to try and make it so that if a whale entangles, that it'll break instead of entangle them. But I think, you know, there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to these, and some of this research has been going on for a while, but in many ways it's still in the early stages in terms of adoption by the industry. Next slide, please. Okay, so the thing about being a government agency, if you're going to implement things like vessel slowdowns and avoidance areas and fishing closures and all of that, is that you need to have some idea where whales are, right? You need to be monitoring for whales in order to know where you need to take some action to try and avoid having them be impacted. And what I'm showing here is just a screenshot from an official Government of Canada, basically real-time updated map that we have called Whale Insight, that gives a summary of a bunch of the different tools that we use for looking for whales. And you can see in the list on the left, you know, some of that are fixed buoys that have hydrophones on them. Some of them are opportunistic things like fishing boats. If they see a whale, they can report it and it gets added. We do, during the sort of main whales feeding seasons, use airplanes to look for whales, and you can see the tracks. This is showing data, as you can see, from the past 14 days here. So there's been a number of reconnaissance flights looking for whales from the air, and we also use things like gliders now. Okay, next slide, please. And just to kind of put some context to this, you know the expression "standing on the shoulders of giants." So DFO is now getting involved in this game of not game, but, you know, the business of monitoring for whales using acoustic hydrophones on gliders. But we really are building on the expertise of a number of groups that have been doing this, not just in our region, but in other parts of the world for a number of years now. And really, you know, a big shout out to Mark Baumgartner, who's done a lot of work developing his DMON system, integrating that into Slocum gliders, which in turn have been very heavily used by our colleagues at Dalhousie University, part of the Sea Otter group, the Meopar Whale Project, who have been doing this kind of real-time monitoring in our area since, well, I'm not sure the exact date when they started, 2015 or 2016 or so. And that work is ongoing. You know, what we're doing, it is not a replacement for what Dal is doing. It is really a supplement. You know, it's really trying to get all hands on deck here. And really, in some sense, I think I think instead of contracting out to have this work done completely to try and get as many groups involved in this sort of monitoring, to be able to monitor as many places as we can, as often as we can, to really get a handle on where we need to take action to protect whales. Okay, next slide, please. So just, with that, we a couple years ago received some money through sort of internal government funding stream to basically try and build our capacity rather than relying on the capacity of our partners such as Dow. And basically, the goal here was to create our own version of this program. Basically, increase DFO's capacity to detect North Atlantic right whales and potentially other whales, although the focus right now is on right whales, using innovative acoustic technologies. So what we acquired were 4 extended bay Slocum gliders, and I will point out they were extended bay for the reason that we need as much battery power as we can, and so these are rechargeable lithium batteries, but extended bay, so we've got kind of extra battery capacity. These are each outfitted with JASCO ocean observers. So these, I'm not a hydrophone expert, and Laura mentioned they're using the PAM MK2, which I think is a similar system. But the basic premise here is that it provides some onboard processing as well as just archival, so that you can do some automated detection and then potentially validation from the real-time data. And I will say, we're very early in our program right now. Like you see 2022, 2023 goals, we've only just kind of done some of these goals. The gliders were only received about a year ago at our facilities. So we've done quite a bit in that year, but we've still got a long way to go, and there's a lot of work to do for this. So basically what we have been doing is testing all of our gliders in the lab and in our I'd say ocean laboratory, which is the Bedford Basin. So the Bedford Institute of Oceanography is on the water in Halifax Harbor. Right on this photo you can see is what's called the Bedford Basin. It's a perfect spot for us, 5-minute boat ride off the end of our pier with 70 meters of water, where we can do a lot of testing of glider piloting and deployment and recovery and all of that. And I'll go through some of these, but we've done a few missions now. One of them was to Roseway Basin, which is a traditional North Atlantic right whale hotspot, as well as another mission to Emerald Basin, which is just outside of Halifax Harbor. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what we call year 0. Technically, we're in year 1 right now, but this involved a lot of the things that the glider groups are probably familiar with when they first get going. So creating and kind of building a lab space. We were lucky in that there's already a fair bit of glider activity at BIO through the program that Dave Hebert and I have been involved with since 2017, which does more traditional glider monitoring. So we had to kind of reconfigure the space to accommodate the different styles of gliders and the workspace needed to be able to have all the technicians involved, and the ballasting facilities and all of that. So there's some photos here just showing the lab space, the new gliders, our ballast tank, and then the team, which were almost all new with glider operations, basically doing all the things you need to do with a new glider, new glider fleet. So getting to know them, learning how to open and close them, doing the training at Paladine, doing a lot of the initial testing and ballasting, and compass calibration, mission simulations, and then a number of these test missions in the basin, like the photo that you saw previously. Next slide, please. So, I guess this is kind of a repeat of what I just said, but a lot of the goals for that first year were, aside from the simulation and the learning, to also try and get a handle on glider noise. Laura talked more about that than I probably even know about. I will show a couple slides that show some of the kinds of things that we're working with there, and to do a bunch of these test missions. It's a little bit hard to see, but in the bottom right corner there, so the last 2 points in this list, these were 2 missions we did with 2 different gliders, just trying out some of the different behaviors of the glider. So one thing I'll point out is The gliders, the Slocum gliders actually have, the ones that we got have a thruster. They have the optional thruster on the back of them. So you can use them as a traditional glider where they do the classic down and up yaw profile. But you can also use the thruster and do some other, there's some other sort of depth holding behaviors where you can go down to a fixed depth and drift there for a certain amount of time. And I don't know if this is the technical term, but our team calls that the bathtub profile, right? Where you come down, you stay at a depth for a while, trying not to use really any of the systems in the glider to get to get everything as quiet as possible, to be able to listen and potentially detect any sounds that you hear. Next slide, please. So these are just a couple of spectrograms, which thankfully I don't need to explain what they are, but showing some examples of the different kind of glider noise that we hear. And as Laura pointed out, ballast, the ballast and the pumps and moving the batteries around are kind of some of the loudest things, and the ones that actually, I guess, corrupt our acoustic detection ability the most, because they have quite the noises are quite loud, and they also span a pretty wide frequency range. I actually noticed there isn't a frequency range on the left-hand side of the spectrogram, and I can't remember what it is, but I think it's in the range, in a comparable range to what Lara was showing. Up in the 100. We're sampling at 120 or maybe 240-ish kilohertz. So that's kind of similar sort of range there. But on the left, you can see noise due to things like the battery. The battery moving, that's what's outlined in those pink boxes, as well as the oil bladder, being pumped, the oil bladder pump operating. That's what's the big chunk that's right in the middle there. On the right-hand side, there's some other noises in there that I don't know exactly what they are, but the one that's being highlighted is kind of along the top of the plot at the much higher frequencies. There's kind of a very rapid periodic signal there, which is actually the altimeter of the glider. So, we tend to try and avoid running into the bottom. It's quite silty in our area, and there's always a fear you might get stuck. So you need an altimeter to kind of know when the glider should be turning around. But that does cause some corruption at those higher frequencies. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of some of the missions we've done. Like I said, I'm not going to get into a lot of the details too much, but our first sort of real mission that we did very much in collaboration with the Dalhousie group, in basically as a training mission. So they held our hand through most of the mission. In fact, they helped us with the recovery, and they did the deployment, they helped us with the deployment and they did the recovery on their own. And held our hand while sort of learning the details of how to use the Slocum fleet management system and how to do the piling, how to deal with various glider things. And so what I've plotted here is just a summary of the glider. You can see in the yellow dots, these are all the surfacings. This was, I should point out, this is Roseway Basin. So this is a very well-known traditional right whale feeding ground. It's less visited now than I think it used to be, but it is still definitely a common place to find whales. It's also right in the middle of a very prolific lobster fishing ground, so you kind of understand how there's a potential conflict between whales and fisheries here. But what I've shown is surfacing points. The green show the waypoints that we were trying to follow as we navigated around the basin, and the red shows aborts, and those are added just because, as a new glider pilot, the aborts are the things that always cause you to have a panic attack, because they never come until Friday night or something, when you think everything's all going well. But it's all part of learning the system. Next slide, or just advance one. And so this shows just a summary of where we heard whales. I don't think these were all right whales. I think there was a mix of species in here that were identified and then validated after. But you can see, like, it's definitely a pretty busy area. So the glider is definitely hearing things that are in fact whales in this region. And this was quite a successful mission overall. Next slide. We did another test mission essentially with another one of our gliders. This one is called Pascal, and we took it out to Emerald Basin, which is, as you can see from the map, just outside of the harbor from where we are. Not as common a right whale sort of aggregation area. There's no there's no specific sort of traditional feeding grounds here, but there are, whales transiting through and other species. And it's a good spot for doing tests because we can get the glider in and out of the water pretty easily using our own vessel and all of that. So this is just another summary of this was, I think, a 2-week mission that we did in November of last year. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, I'm running out of time, eh?
Yeah, just a minute or two.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
won't cut
I'm not
through.
going to get into all the details of this, but I did want to show just a summary of the kind of thing that we see in real time. So what the observer is doing is it's doing some analysis of the acoustics, producing a spectrogram. It doesn't even really send the spectrogram back in real time, but it does send its candidate detections as well as what they call contours, right? So it takes the spectrogram, it detects things in it that it thinks are significant, and it sends back these basically blobby shapes as something that can be used by an acoustic expert to validate that detection. You can see some examples of things here. I think the gray contours, which are a little bit hard to see. Some of these they're identified as glider noise. There's some 20 hertz pulses here, which were identified as from a fin whale. But these are basically the ways that we try to do some validation of what's coming back. Next slide. We'll just skip this one because I won't get into details. I did just want to say we just did one mission. We recovered last weekend in a new location. This is in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. Basically all on our own. We put the glider out. It headed out for 2.5 weeks. We didn't actually have any confirmed detections on this one. There were some possible ones that came back through the real-time system, but it turned out that when those happened, they were during times of really high glider noise. So it's really hard, obviously, to confirm you've got a whale when it happens when the buoyancy pump is running. So we will be doing some validation from the high resolution data, but we haven't had a chance to do that yet. Next slide. And yeah, that's all for me. This is our team, of Laura, Kathleen, and Pam, who were basically hired at the same time we bought the gliders and have really done a Herculean effort to spin up a program in a very short amount of time. Obviously, as I said, with the help from some close colleagues, including the Dalhousie group in particular. So that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Clark. That was awesome. And I mean, just the idea, the operational component where you go out and collect the data and you're able to pass that off to decision makers that can mitigate kills. That was very very good to see, as well as your approach to doing that. So thanks a ton. I'm gonna just jump. I know there's a question or two. Please reach out to Clark directly. I don't want to cut Celine off of her time here. And Celine, you have your full 20 minutes. I can cut my admin marks off. So it's more important to hear from you. So Dr. Celine Fregosi, she'll be talking on approaches for marine mammal passive acoustic monitoring using sea gliders. Celine received her PhD in wildlife sciences from Oregon State University in 2020. Her dissertation research focused on understanding how passive acoustic gliders can best be used in surveys for and density estimation of marine mammals. Celine is in a unique position as both a bioacoustician working with glider collected data, but also she is the primary sea glider pilot in our group. She has completed passive acoustic glider surveys primarily in the Pacific, including Hawaii, Southern California, and Oregon, as well as the Gulf of Mexico. Currently, she works as a cetacean acoustician with Ocean Associates, working as a contractor for a cetacean research program at NOAA's Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, and an affiliate with the Cooperative Institute for Marine Ecosystems and Resource Studies at Oregon State University, NOAA PML, where she still collaborates with the Bioacoustic Glider Group. That was a mouthful. That's great. Thanks, Celine. And I turn it over to you. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Yeah, my affiliation is just somehow keeps getting longer. So thank you
No
for reading
problem.
all that out. I think I'll hopefully go through like Clark was saying, and everything that Laura set up makes it really a nice situation to present after them. So I'll just jump right into it. First, a little bit more about me and sort of my place in this glider world is I really consider myself a bioacoustician, but I like cool new toys. And so I got really lucky and got the opportunity to work with gliders for my PhD. And so when I was there, when I started, we were just borrowing other people's gliders and putting PAM systems on them, and then got 2 of our own. And then now we're up to 4 over the last 8 years or so. And so then when I finished that up, I started a new job as a contractor with Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, but I'm really lucky that I get to keep collaborating with OSU and keep working with gliders. We're just flying them in different warmer waters now. As all of you know, no glider program is a one-person job. So the work I'm presenting here either was or is part of projects that are truly team efforts. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the key folks from both my group at OSU and now with NOAA that are essential to getting the gliders in and out of the water, developing acoustic systems, helping with analysis. And so I just wanted to kind of give them a shout out real quick here. For my part of the webinar, this may be sort of ambitious, but I'm going to kind of try to split up my time into two topics. First, I'm going to share some actual research and some of the initial work that we did on tackling density estimation of whales from gliders. And then I'm really quickly going to share a toolbox that I've been working on that's designed specifically for working with passive acoustic sea gliders and trying to make our job working with them a little bit easier. So jumping into marine mammal density estimation, all marine mammal species are protected, and their conservation and management requires accurate information on seasonal and spatial distribution and occurrence. So like Clark was saying, he wants to know when they are to immediately slow down the ships, but we also have questions about sort of where they are and when they are, so we can make decisions about how best to manage those species. The sort of gold standard is how many animals are in an area at a given time, estimating population density or abundance. And so passive acoustic monitoring has been proven as a really effective tool for marine mammal research. Like Laura outlined, sound travels really well underwater. And so it's actually a better, can be sometimes a better way to survey for marine mammals than visuals, because these animals are spending most of their lives underwater. Marine mammals produce species-specific vocalizations, and so we can tell them apart just from those sounds. And in some cases, they're behaviorally specific, so we can even tell what they're doing based on the sound. Gliders come into, traditionally we've used ship-based or moored stationary recorders, but gliders are the new tool on the scene for passive acoustic monitoring. And they're really great because they can move, so they can cover more area, sort of like a ship, but they're more cost effective than a ship and can be out longer often than a ship can. So it kind of fills in the trade-offs between a stationary or a ship-based recorder. And they're a more cost-effective way to reach really remote areas that are expensive and time-consuming to reach by vessel. They've been used on a whole to record a whole bunch of marine mammal species and in, I would say, all of the world's oceans. Don't quote me on that, but all around the world. We already know how to acoustically or estimate animal abundance or density from acoustic data, and just using passive acoustic data. So we can go from recordings of calls. Can you see my mouse here? I don't know if it shows up or not. On the left panel, that's a spectrogram showing some fin whale calls. So we can go from recordings of calls to numbers of actual calls or acoustic events, and then get to do some math and get to the density or abundance total number of animals in a given area. And to get there, we need to account for things like false detections, animal vocal behavior, such as their calling rate. We need to get an estimate of the true area surveyed and account for misdetections. And so we need to get something that's called a detection probability. These methods have been worked out for stationary and towed arrays, but what about doing it with gliders? So that would be great to be able to do that, but we have some special considerations. First off, they're slow moving. So our previous assumptions about animal movement relative to the recorder aren't valid anymore. They move up and down in the water column, which adds, previously 2D problem now into a sort of 3D, more complicated one. And they typically are carrying a single hydrophone. I know that's changing, but historically that's been the case. And that makes, we need to typically get the range to the animals to do all of this density estimation. And that's really difficult, if not impossible, with just a single hydrophone. So in that case, we need some sort of alternative way to get our detection probability. So what I wanted to share here is just a quick overview of sort of a framework setup demonstration that we did to estimate fin whale density from a sea glider. And this is just one example. There's still a lot of work to be done here, but it's, I think, moving us in the right direction towards being able to do this more often. And it shows it is possible and that we can address sort of these unique aspects of a glider to get to animal density from glider collected data. The methods were, for this study, we conducted a 2-week experiment in Southern California where we flew one sea glider, shown here with the orange track, on top of an array of like 79 bottom-mounted hydrophones that are operated by the US Navy. It's called the SCORE range, kind of like the one that Laura was talking about up in Washington. This one's just off of San Diego. But those hydrophones are cabled to land, and so they're recording all the time and can give us this really nice acoustic snapshot of what's going on in this area. So we were given 2 weeks of time over the Christmas holiday that we were allowed to fly our glider in this otherwise very active training area. And so we took advantage of that. We used an example 96 hours of recording from this survey for what I'm going to present here. We used the array hydrophones to localize the calling fin whales. And then we measured the distances to the fin whales from the glider. And using those, we were able to build out a detection probability. And then finally, we were able to estimate density, both from the glider and then also from the full array. So we were able to sort of ground truth our new glider-based density estimate with what we could consider truth using sort of a more established method with the array. So jumping right into results and kind of how we dealt with some of the nuances of the glider. To deal with the issue of animal movement, so in density estimation from a stationary recorder, the animals are faster than than the recorder, and you can deal with that. When you are estimating it from ship-collected acoustic data, the ship is moving faster than the animals, so you can make some assumptions about that and deal with that. The glider is sort of moving more in the realm of the speed of animals, and that's can be a problem. So what we did is we used a snapshot approach. We basically broke the glider track line, shown here in gray, up into individual snapshots, and so like symbolized here by the little gray dots. And we used 6 minutes because that was sort of balanced, minimal glider movement, minimal assumed fin whale movement based on their average swim speeds, and gave us enough acoustic data to work with. This would probably need to be adjusted for different species of interest, but that was a way we got around the glider movement. And basically each of those snapshots were then treated like an individual stationary recorder. Another issue we had to deal with was flow noise. So Laura talked a lot about the different noises that the glider makes when it pumps and rolls and pitches, and those we could kind of work around and ignore in our detection process. But flow noise was a problem when the glider was moving very quickly. And so in this plot, this is another spectrogram. This actually shows 24 hours. And so those light blue circles show where there's high levels of flow noise below about 100 hertz, right in the band where fin whale calls occur. And so then the orange boxes show the fin whale calls. The glider's profile is put on over the top there. And so you can see during descents, when the glider was moving faster, flow noise was higher and it masks the calls. And then when the glider was in its ascent phase, you can actually see the little fin whale calls in there. And so what we needed to do was basically incorporate a measure of flow noise. We used a 40 hertz noise level, so just above the fin whale calls. And we incorporated that into our detection probability model as a covariate. And that allowed us to deal with that. And then lastly, glider depth didn't affect our detection probability. This was somewhat unexpected, but again, this is just a single sort of relatively small experiment. And I think this is something that would warrant more work in the future, especially depending on what species you might be interested in and what their calling behavior is like. So the final results in terms of the detection probability, that plot's shown over on the left. And basically what it's showing is that the further you get from the glider, the probability of hearing a calling fin whale goes down. And the key that we found was this was highly dependent on that flow noise measure, which wasn't really surprising once we saw how much the flow noise dominated some of the acoustic record. And so the median noise level for the whole data set was 97 dB. So that's shown here in the dotted line. And that's what we used for our subsequent density estimates. Our effective detection radius, so that's the distance at which sort of you have a 50% probability of hearing fin whales, was 17.1 kilometers. And then our final density estimates there are, it's a little bit weird to think about, but 1.8 whales per 1,000 square kilometers. That was estimated just by the glider data. And then just from the array data, it was 1.3 whales per 1,000 square kilometers. And so as you can see, the confidence intervals are quite wide. They overlap. So we consider these kind of, comparable density estimates. The issue actually where most of this error is coming from was from the estimate of animal calling behavior. We actually don't know a lot about animal calling behavior for many of the species. There's a lot of work going into that right now, but we still need to do a lot of work on that front. And so in this case, we are estimating fin whale calling rate, which goes into our density estimator based on just 10 tagged fin whales. So not a lot of data there, huge variability in that, and that sort of propagated forward here. But in the world of actual marine mammal density estimates, this isn't too bad. So we were pretty excited to see that we could do it with the glider. But the thing was, this required this really fancy, expensive Navy array that not everyone has access to. They don't occur around the world everywhere. And so that's kind of a problem. So what do we need to do next? What we really need to do to make density estimation from passive acoustic lidar data sort of more broadly applicable is to be able to get that detection function. So get animal locations or distances to animals directly from the glider data itself. This might look like multiple hydrophones on a glider, multiple gliders flying sort of in a formation and using them together, or even just modeling detection range from sound propagation. Another thing we need to look into is survey design and sort of the ability of gliders to maintain a planned survey track line to make density estimate inference over wider areas that's based on sort of setting up random survey track lines or a systematic survey. And so, as Laura was talking about, the glider's true path underwater is a little bit different than what we might be assuming on the surface. And so we kind of have to dig into that a little bit more. And then also the effective glider depth. We didn't see it in this one example, but I do think for maybe some of the deep diving species like beaked whales, where the glider being at depth, it might actually be closer to the animals, that our detection probability is going to change with depth. Okay, so then jumping into the toolbox. So I wanted to share, so I've been working on this, and then also my collaborator, Dave Mellinger at Oregon State. We call it AGIT, or the Acoustic Glider Analysis Tools and Environment. The idea for this tool set was sort of born out of necessity. So our group at OSU, it's pretty small. When it first started, it was my co-advisors, Holger and Dave, myself, the grad student and sole pilot in the beginning, and our engineers and some research faculty that worked, part-time on data analysis. They were kind of on our own. And we were using a brand new acoustic system developed in-house. And we were piggybacking on the oceanography department at OSU. They have a larger glider group. We were kind of piggybacking on their base station. And so what we could modify with their base station and their piloting website was limited. And so we needed sort of an alternative to be able to produce the plots that gave us information about the acoustic system and battery use with the acoustic system on our own. And then we also found that we were making some pretty standard figures and outputs after we got the gliders back and processed the data and found citations and sort of reporting on different things. And so we wanted to sort of standardize what we were doing with that. So when we got a grant from NOAA's Uncrewed Systems Research Transition Office, we had this opportunity to kind of further develop this toolbox with the hope that if NOAA moves towards sort of sustained regular marine mammal passive acoustic glider surveys, that we can set up some standard reporting deliverables and make this easier to use as we sort of build up our group. The toolbox itself, so it's MATLAB based, and here are the links to where it is online. Full disclosure, it is very much under development, but I'm using this as a somewhat recruiting message of would love to have people testing it, using it, finding bugs, suggesting features, and all that stuff. So please check it out if it's something you're interested in. It has 4 main parts. There's piloting tools that can be used both for survey planning and survey execution, and then sort of what we call our post-flight tools that are used once we get everything back and actually go through and find the whales that we're looking for and create some outputs from that. It's not a GUI, but instead operates using sort of a configuration type approach. So what you would do is set up a text file shown on the right here. That's a configuration file and sets information about your glider and your location and your target duration, what acoustic system you're using, et cetera. And then you can load that in and go through all the other functions that you want to use. Just a few examples of the different components. In the survey planning tools, again, this has so far been designed for sea gliders. It would be great to incorporate SLOCOM and possibly Sea Explorer data down the line if people are interested in it. We just have worked with sea gliders, so that's what I've been able to develop this with. But it can make, you can take a path that you've made in Google Earth sort of to plan out your survey and automatically turn that into a properly formatted targets file for sea gliders, which I think are a pain to write. And that does that automatically. It'll do some calculations about sort of your estimated mission duration. And so you can plan your passive acoustic duty cycle and battery use and that sort of thing. And then also you can plot this bathymetric profile, which I show here. We don't fly with the altimeter because we don't want that noise in the upper frequencies. It's right in the range of odontocete clicks that we're really interested in. And so we fly without the altimeter. So we're very afraid of hitting the bottom. So we can use this bathymetric profile to kind of see, okay, around which waypoints do we need to worry about bringing the glider into shallower depths and that kind of thing. For survey execution, it does a bunch of automatic downloading of base station files. It plots some additional plots. The Sea Glider piloting tools make some of these plots, but they don't have any functionality for working with acoustic data. So the plot on the top left here shows the storage space as it goes down on the SD cards for one of our acoustic systems. We have to manually switch those when they get full. And so we need to track when they're full, which is shown there in the red lines. And then we also spit out some estimates about ETA to recovery and that sort of thing. And then one of the more exciting new things is that we're currently testing the Whisper system that was designed at OSU and is now commercially available. It has the ability to integrate a real-time click detector called IRMA. And so a bunch of that was developed, in-house, and we didn't have, Clark had that really nice example of how the LFDCS detector spits out, these traces for the baleen whales that they're looking for. This detector, similar idea, but in our case, we're testing it with sperm whales. And so what we can do is at the end of each dive, we get this detection report and it generates plots of the ICI or the inter-click interval of the whale calls. And so then the pilot can actually look at this and try and assess, okay, is this a false detection or true detection? So this example here shows those top 2 panels are likely false detections. It's probably actually the glider's onboard transponder. But that bottom one looks promising that it's actually most likely a group of sperm whales. We won't know till we get it back next week, but it's nice to be able to see that in real time. And then lastly, the post-flight analysis tools, those kind of sort of make your general outputs that you might want to look at, such as long-term spectrograms, plots of detections versus glider depth. That's what's shown in gray and red. And then some nice publication quality maps that show the location of the glider when it had acoustic detections. And I will wrap that up there. Again, with an actual picture of whales, which were of course spotted just after the glider was recovered. But here's again the links to the toolbox and a reference to the density estimation paper.
Great, thanks, Celine. Excellent, excellent. Very complimentary talks for sure across the from the vehicle noise to the operational impacts of collecting the data, getting to the decision makers, the technical challenges, and some of the research. So I thank the talkers a ton. I know people have to get off. So real quick, I mean, this is being recorded. And so please, and I'll leave this up for a couple minutes because there are some links in the chat box if somebody wants to grab them. But since it's recorded and it will be posted on underwatergliders.org in a few days, you'll be able to go back. And please reach out to these folks. And again, thanks to the speakers. Super job. Very complimentary. There is some interest of a couple of people to talk on some more on passive acoustics that we weren't able to fit in. So if we have at least one talk, if anybody has any additional passive acoustics that they would like to put into the next webinar series, please get in touch. And we will keep this going and look forward to many more talks. And thanks again, everybody. And we'll reach out quickly. And thanks to the people who were able to attend and listen to the speakers. We had over 70 folks at one point. So super job. And thanks, everybody.